So we'll do the same thing again. If you would like to, you've got something you'd like to ask, a conversation you'd like to start, then if you use the hand waving emoji. Mark, out of the traps, as they say.
Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Since it's a much question, I was wondering if you would be happy to talk a little bit about around the area of passive response and active response to um, resultants.
Can you define what you mean by active and passive in this respect? Because resultant is the passive side.
Yes. So yeah, essentially the differences between I guess the non-grasping and the acting or grasping in response to a condition.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Or have I just said it?
well, you have in a way, but you know, it deserves expanding upon, doesn't it? So essentially, with experience, there's the passive side of experience and the active side. The passive side is the resultant side. So based on the past actions we performed, there are presently occurring resultants, and we experience those resultants as the kinds of sensory contacts that arise, any of the 5 physical senses, and mind being the 6th sense. So 6 sensory contacts. So it could be something heard, something seen, something smelled, something touched, something tasted, or it could be something arising in mind, a memory, a thought. And there is, on that passive resultant side, there is a feeling component, and also the arising of the tendency to act. And often people forget to include the tendency to act in response to the feeling as part of the resultant side, but it is. It only becomes new action if we act on that impulse. And so there we have the dividing. So based on the Buddha said, based on feeling, if it's a pleasant feeling, the tendency is to grasp after that feeling, to want to continue to experience it or experience a similar feeling. If it's a painful feeling, then the tendency is aversion, wanting to get rid of and destroy that painful feeling. And if it's a neutral feeling, i.e., neither pleasant nor unpleasant, the tendency is to simply ignore it. And what we find generally when we start looking at feelings is we find it very difficult at first to detect what a neutral feeling is, because we're so used to ignoring them. And thank goodness most contacts have neutral feelings. Otherwise, life would be untenable if we were just forever chasing pleasant and trying to avoid the unpleasant. So if there's no mindfulness, if there's no awareness of condition-dependent origination, if there's no development through these practices, then ignorantly we chase after the pleasant, we try to avoid and are adverse to the unpleasant, and we ignore the neutral feelings. That, therefore, is craving for life to be different. So that is the active component of which you speak. That is the active response. And that craving then leads to the clinging attachment to the pleasant or the unpleasant or the neutral. So what you're calling the passive is really the mindfulness and clear comprehension of the true nature of resultants, the true nature of sensory contacts, the true nature of the feelings that arise upon sensory contacts, and including the mindfulness and the clear comprehension of the tendency to react with grasping after those feelings. And so if you have that comprehension, if you have that understanding, then as the contacts arise, as the feelings arise, you do not grasp after them with either attachment, aversion, or you don't ignore them. You observe the feeling, you observe the feeling's tendency, its inborn nature to arise and pass away. And that's what frees you from actively engaging in an unwholesome resultant, which is going to cause future unhappy experiences. Does that?
Yeah,
So
it's really
really,
interesting.
it's the mindfulness and the comprehension of that process that you need in order to be able to truly, genuinely not react.
It's interesting you're talking about the tendency. I suppose there is a tendency to regard the tendency as being, me, myself, or I've done it again, blah, blah, blah. But in fact, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that the tendency is part of the resultant package bit, and it's not a new action.
No, it's not a new action until there is the volition. Up until that point, it's almost like Schrodinger's cat in the box. Up until that point, it's just potential. So it is the arising of the potential for that reaction. Now you sense it, you feel it. It's like the initial launching of that response is not blameworthy. It's only if there is the failure to recognize it and it then gets worked on actively. That's the volition, the active sending out the army to do your bidding in that respect. That's when it becomes a new act of greed or a new act of hatred. Yeah. So it's at the point when it has already, essentially it has arisen, but you're not yet acting upon it in a fresh way, because otherwise it would be impossible. There has to be that allowance, and that means in meditation, for instance, we've got more scope, we've got more room to be able to allow these resultants, including that tendency to arise, in order to be able to see it and truly comprehend it and choose wisely based on past experience. And I would also say it also includes the failure to do that you're allowed to fail to catch that unskillful or unwholesome action in meditation, because then you immediately start experiencing the results. There are immediate results that accrue for doing resentment or for doing, sexual lust or whatever in the meditation. And the resultants show you that it's unskillful. So you learn either way. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks. It was a very good question. Annie has asked the question, just asked a very simple question. A friend asked, what tradition is this? Theravada. Yeah, the center, the House of Inner Tranquility, was created by Alan and Jackie James, who were themselves trained in the Theravadan tradition as coming from Thailand. So their teacher, the Venerable Kapilawado, was an ordained monk in Thailand. So it's come through that particular tradition. Alan and Jackie, when they began the center, decided that they didn't want to import the cultural aspects of the Thai Theravada tradition, but they did most definitely want what was written in the Pali Canon. And, so what we do is very much founded on Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. It's the cultural aspects that have been adjusted to suit conditions here in the West. So
thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, not at all. Hope that explains it. Lucy.
Yes, hi. When
there's a habitual tendency which arises, and you restrain going into that habitual tendency, and then eventually, by restraining, you see what is underlying that tendency to arise. How important is it to restrain the tendency in order to see the underlying cause, compared to restrain the tendency in order to learn about the, it's transient and non-self and unsatisfactory?
I think it's a very good question. I think it is a natural process. I think it is a natural progression in your understanding of things. So I think that you can't, well, in a sense, I'm just about to contradict myself. You can't say that, understanding the underlying drive that causes the habitual tendency is dealt with first, and then you start seeing transience, or the other way around. I think it's a melting pot of gradual clarity as to what's going on in all respects. So just to help people get their heads around what we're talking about, say an example would be there is a strong tendency to over effort in a meditation. And so what Lucy's saying is that there would have to be the acknowledgement of the tendency towards over effort and the willingness to restrain that over effort again and again and again. And in doing so, then there might be underlying issues that emerge that are the reason why the over effort has gone into. And it might be something like doubt, for instance, self-doubt, or it might be some early life conditioning, like being told you have to be productive. And so they're the underlying issues that give rise to a tendency to try too hard, right? So I think if I understand correctly, Lucy, and please do clarify if I haven't got this quite right, what you're asking is, well, what's more important, to see the transient nature of the habitual tendency, or to explore the underlying drives that give rise to it? Okay, well, I would say that the way that you restrain, the habitual tendency, let's say it's over effort, is to comprehend and understand that over effort itself is transient. So when we're saying we're restraining something, what we're saying is we're refusing to act further on it in order that we don't ignore it, in order that we can see that it's transient. And if we do that repeatedly, the underlying drive that gives rise to that habitual tendency starts to emerge. We can no longer hide from it. It starts to sort of come into consciousness strongly. Like, for instance, a meditator had this really clear image of a parent standing over them, pointing at them in a meditation, saying, you're just sitting there doing nothing. You've got to do something. You've got to work. You've got to, and so it came up to the conscious level that they had this underlying drive, this work ethic that was actually getting in the way of a balanced meditation. Once that underlying drive emerges, you do exactly the same thing. That underlying drive is transient. I mean, it's a huge thing to actually see that underlying drive, because it's come up into consciousness and you're able to, therefore, to deal with it consciously, but it's the same basic premise. That underlying drive is transient. It's originated through conditions. It's ungraspable. It's not me. It's not mine. It's not myself. And so what happens is you get, with both the habitual tendency and the underlying drive that gives rise to it, gradually over time, you see that it is indeed all transient, unsatisfactory, and non-self. I hope, does that get close to what you were?
Yeah, it does. But one small follow-up question: does it matter if you never see the underlying drive? If you're able to see the other good stuff, the non-satisfactory, non-self, etc., does it matter if you just kind of never find out the underlying drive, and it's like, oh well, that doesn't matter. It would have been interesting, but I never found out.
If it's just hypothetical that there might be, if it just transpires that it's just that habitual tendency and there is nothing underlying it that needs to be resolved, fine. And again, this is an intellectual problem. It's the problem of second guessing, of perhaps hearing about even perhaps somebody else having discovered an underlying drive which gave rise to a hindrance, and we go, well, I don't have one of those. Why haven't I got one of those? And like, as if you want to add more subconscious stuff to the mix. If it ain't there, it ain't there. If it is there, it is there, and it will become apparent through that restraint. So I think the key with meditation is just deal with what is presenting itself right now, and if you're willing, if you're able to just content yourself, and that requires great faith, because it's saying essentially, I'm going to allow whatever wants to arise, and I'm just going to focus all my attention and my mindfulness and my clear comprehension on what is arising now, rather than trying to create a framework where I'll feel safe, an intellectual framework of what's going on, where I'll feel safe and I'll know what's happening and I'll be in charge. So it does come down to an issue of faith, the faith just to be with what's literally unfolding right now. And if you can do that, then the question will be answered one way or the other. Either there is an underlying drive in that situation or there isn't. So
Thank you.
Yeah. Sally.
Oh, hello. Sorry, I'm balancing on some grapes at the minute, so it could all go really bad.
Balancing on some grapes. I don't think I've ever heard that sentence before in my life.
Sorry. So I did have a question. So I was meditating a few days ago, and I was thinking about my daughter came into my sort of meditation, and I had this overwhelming feeling of pride. And I was quite intrigued to know what your thoughts of that are, because when I did some research afterwards, everything was bad. It's bad because it's how you feel about it. And I just wanted to know what your take on it is. And also something else that came up, divine pride. I couldn't get my head around it. Is it something that you can explain?
I too have never heard of that.
You've never heard of it? Well, that's good then. So perhaps just think about the first question.
Yeah, by all means. Did it feel wrong when you felt it?
No, it was a really nice feeling.
Trust your feelings. Like, because I mean, it's a bit like the difference between craving and desire to do. People get very confused because they think this is all about getting rid of all desires, and it's not.
Yeah.
It's about getting rid of inefficient actions that create dukkha, suffering. Okay, so in this question, there is a natural reflection upon your child and how he or she is doing at school or whatever it might be, and what arises is that sort of glow, of pride in what your children are accomplishing. Okay, so there is nothing to resolve there. There is nothing that needs to be changed. All you do is note what kind of state of mind it is. In this case, of say it's pride in your kids, with a sort of warm, glowy feeling accompanying it. Yeah. Was it permanent or impermanent?
What do you mean? Did it come and go? I mean, I watched it pass. It passed away again and then went on to something else. So
exactly. And so in the meditation, what can happen is that doubt can arise about something that we've seen, which is completely understandable.
Yeah.
But the golden rule is always to come back to the most simple instruction. It's to rest content in the moment, watching things arise and pass away. So noting what arises, noting that it's there and then it's gone. There's nothing you have to change. Literally, it wouldn't matter whether it was pride in your children's accomplishments or blood-curdling rage. It doesn't matter. You note it. It's there. There's a feeling component that comes with it. You note it. You deepen your understanding of transience. So instead of trying to solve the mind and solve the things that go on in the mind, all we're looking to do is to, as it were, take that little step back and just note and just observe the way things arise and pass away due to conditions. And in doing so, you don't stop loving your kids, you don't stop delighting in their successes. It's just there is this understanding that this, like every other mental state, arises and passes away due to conditions, and it's the deepening of that wisdom that we want.
What
And
about
really, yeah, sorry.
what about in that case? I mean, that's a separate thing. But what about when we feel pride in our own achievements? Is that a different ball game? Because is that intimated?
If you've seen that, like, you see, I mean, at the moment, I'm one of the rooms in this house here is being the floor's being redone. I wouldn't want workers coming in to do the floor who didn't take pride in their profession.
Yeah.
You know, I'm really glad that we got some really excellent builders who really take pride in their work. And they do it because they know that that's how they're going to have a successful career. Right? It only becomes problematic when it becomes conceit, when it's then becomes, and this makes me better than you or somebody else. That's when it becomes problematic, and that's because somebody is not seeing that these are transient phenomenon. Because the more you see that they're transient phenomenon, the more I can't say that way. The more you know, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not the self of me, and so it doesn't become a basis for the arising of conceit. And so to say I take pride in my appearance, you know, there's nothing that's not unskillful at all. It only becomes unskillful if then we start saying, and doesn't that make me better than everyone else? You know,
You use it then.
Yeah, because they're not sick. Somebody is not seeing that it's transient, unsatisfactory, and not self.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. Anybody else got something I'd like to talk about? Oh, okay. Jim. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Paul. I guess at some level, I want to talk about sense restraint. And the question arises because I go for walks in the morning, partly for exercise and partly to practice mindfulness. And I'm starting from my house, and it's about a half-hour walk, and I've designed about 8 walks in the different compass directions. And initially it was fine defining them, just which road I would go down and which route I would take so that it would be about a half-hour walk. But now that I've established all the different routes, the idea of going the same place just seems a little dull, which I think is probably just my doubt, but I do it anyways. But on these walks, I go from either looking at the pavement ahead of me and trying to focus on the moment, or being lost in thought and looking around at the various buildings and lawns and whatever else around me. Not sure where I'm going with this, but I thought it might be good for me to kind of review the whole idea of sense restraint. So.
Okay, can we look at this in a slightly different way? Like, my first thought is like, well, that's a wonderful thing to do. It's a wonderful opportunity to explore, to explore the senses. So, because the tendency can say, I need to practice sense restraint. I need to be disciplined. I need to not allow the mind just to go where it wants to go. But we're losing the sense of love for life. We're losing the sense that here's something that we can enjoy. We can marvel at how the picture is coming into being. We can, so it's an exploration of conscious experience whilst walking. And that I was saying before the meditation that, with meditation itself, that we don't want to be trapped in trying to hold mindfulness together and keep it as this thing that we've created, because its nature is to arise and pass away anyway, and it's not natural. It doesn't feel natural. It feels forced. Whereas if you're willing to start from the basis of, say, if you're walking and you say, okay, so I'm gonna be in the body as I walk, and I'm going to take an interest in what I can hear, what I see, not in terms of like the content of what I see, but the act of seeing, not the content of what I'm hearing, but the act of hearing, and observing how perception arises based on the sight or the sound or the tactile sensation. Enjoying the walking process and observing how fluid it is and how it's such a complex process. I couldn't possibly be in charge of that. It's got its own nature. It's got its non-self nature just in the walking process. And so it runs, doing it in this very light, apparently undisciplined way, means it does give the opportunity for the mind to run off track. But what if you've included that as part of your walk? What if the mind running off track and becoming interested in something is not treated as an enemy, but is treated as just a what's the word I'm looking for? Just an appendage? No, that's not quite the right word. It's just an extension. That's right, an extension of that. That's that whole same thing of taking an interest in what takes place. And so, I've started thinking about my favorite architect or something because I saw that building and it made me think of that. And so it's all part of the meditation, the walking meditation. It's not being excluded, but once, and this is where the sense restraint comes in, once you've established that mindfully, you come back to your mindful walking practice. If the mind gets taken in by some sounds that it hears and it goes into those, that's fine. At the point when you realize that that's happened, that's the point you acknowledge it and then bring the attention back to the mindfulness practice. Yeah. Right. So that way you get to enjoy your walk without any sense that you're up against it, trying to create this mindfulness practice. Mindfulness is perfectly natural. You get to explore, you get to deepen your sense of the mystery of existence. I mean, I was interested in the fact that you get bored of doing particular walks. The more you explore mindfully, the more you realize you never go on the same walk.
Yeah, I'm getting bored at the idea of the walk before I do it. Usually I just do it anyways and get into it. Don't mind
the idea of the walk.
Yeah.
That's a very important distinction, because that's where the view of permanence is. Yeah. So it's the view of permanence. Oh, it's the same walk, but it's never the same walk. So literally, I've been doing the same walks for the last 20 years. I'm so boring, but it's never the same walk.
All right. Thank you.
Great question. That covered it for you.
Okay. I think so. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Lucy, back for some more.
Yes. What is unsatisfactory about something neutral, like the breathing process, or even just one tactile sensation within the breathing process, something that's really just nothing?
Well, exactly. Well, you've answered it yourself there. It's something that is almost literally nothing. The fact that it's transient. So unsatisfactoriness has different levels of appreciation of unsatisfactoriness. It's like being whacked in the head is unsatisfactory on a very visceral level. Stopping of breathing altogether is very unsatisfactory. But there are levels and levels to unsatisfactoriness. And I think in the more subtle realm of insight practice, as the insight into transience deepens, and you start to realize just how impossible it is to grasp any sensory phenomena, any aggregate, how impossible that is to be able to identify that as being me and my and myself, and how this shows up, the inherent insecurity of the aggregates, then you start to recognize unsatisfactoriness and the mark of unsatisfactoriness at a different level. And again, that is a natural progression. As the insight deepens and becomes more profound, frankly, then it's more, so it's dukkha. The fact that you can't grasp onto anything is dukkha, but it's a much more rarefied level than being whacked over the head or something. Does that help?
Yes, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's something I'll have to see myself, obviously.
Yeah, again,
that is good. Thank you.
Yeah, again, it comes back to this whole thing of you've got to allow the process to take you on the journey of insight. But yeah, so it's a more subtle appreciation of dukkha. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Sarah, I thought you had your hand up. Did you have your hand up, Sarah?
Yeah, just briefly, I had my hand up when you were talking about the walking meditation. What I just wanted to share, what I found helpful is to do similar to a more formal walking, where we just, when we're out walking along a street, just set a kind of a point to say, I'm just going to pause there briefly and briefly retrospect. So like at a lamppost is usually a good one, at a tree. And I found it just helps to feel that you're actually doing what you've intended, which is to note mindfully and cut through the streams of inevitable daydream or whatever it is.
Yes, that's a very good point. Mindfulness is a transient phenomenon, like every other aggregate.
Mm-hmm.
It arises and passes away due to conditions. The mind is flighty. It's very easily changed. You're on one train of thought, and then the next moment you're on another train of thought. It does require practice to get stronger in it. And I think what we get stronger in is not so much that we keep mindfulness going for longer, so much as the intervals where the mind becomes interested in something else, those shorten. So it gives the impression that the mindfulness is lasting longer, but actual fact, you've noticed it sooner. So the mind doesn't go so far into the daydream. Okay. So having a regular point of stopping and just doing a brief retrospection, a brief reflection on where the mind has just been by, say, using lampposts, that's a very good way of just developing that skill of noticing that the mindfulness has lapsed. So we're not in dispute with the fact that mindfulness lapses. It's fine that mindfulness lapses. It's just how soon into its lapsing do we recognize that it's lapsed and are therefore able to set it up again? Yeah. So that's why having these breaks with your walking meditation is so helpful. So yeah, very good point, Sarah. Was there any follow-up with that, Sarah, or is that good? It's good. Okay. Ellen.
Hi. A follow-up to that. Something I think I get stuck on in that process of pausing at a designated spot and doing some reflection. If I've walked 30 seconds from one lamppost to the next, when I'm retrospecting, I think I get too analytical and expect myself to review what happened for the whole last 30 seconds. Or is the method sufficient to, at the stopping point, say, where am I now? That's my question.
Yeah. Okay. Again, I think that something that develops and changes with repeated application through just developing that particular skill. That, you know, when I discovered that it didn't matter if I couldn't remember anything or I couldn't recall anything from that period just before I stopped, didn't matter, because I could note I can't remember anything. And that's still just as interesting and helpful. It's just, are we judging ourselves? If we're judging our worth and the worth of our practice based on what kinds of things arise, then that would be deemed out and out failure, and I'd be really hard on myself. But if, as I'd realized there's no success or failure. It's not about achieving a grade. It's about the gradual deepening of my knowledge and understanding of how life works. And that's got no grade attached to it. That's got no pass mark. It's just me, an ongoing investigation and exploration. So it doesn't, you hit your mark to stop briefly and just retrospect. It doesn't matter what you discover. And it doesn't matter how much there is or how little there is. It doesn't matter what qualities you discover at all. You're just developing the capacity for mindfulness and reflecting on mindfulness. And so, yeah, so
thank you.
But that's
Good.
difficult because it means you've got nothing, you've got no template to which you can compare. So oftentimes it's back to this faith thing where you don't know where you are. But if we can get out of the idea that it doesn't matter how good you are at something, that it's all good. It's all good because it's not about how well I'm doing. That's not what the retrospection is for. It's not about trying to determine whether I'm doing well.
Whether I'm retrospecting well or not. I think that's what I'm getting stuck in. Like good retrospection, I should be able to perfectly recall exactly what happened in the last 30 seconds. Like, no. Okay.
But when you start to realize how complex a web of conditions are actually at work, you realize you could never, through anything you could think, could you fully account for the last 30 seconds. It's just no way. So you're always going, in that sense, you're always going to fail. So you might as well just give it up. And instead of treating it as how it was, that retrospection was never intended to be about how well am I doing. It's just that opportunity. It's the same with keeping a journal for the meditation. It's the opportunity after the event to go back through that data that had been brought up through your mindful exploring and investigating, just an opportunity in hindsight just to go back for it before it's lost forever, to go back through that data and reanalyze it. I mean, was it transient or not? Turns out it was definitely transient. Every component part of the last 30 seconds has completely disappeared with no remainder, no sight, no sound, no taste, touch, smell, no thought, no feeling, no moment of consciousness has survived. And so even in hindsight, you can still do tremendous amounts in terms of deepening your awareness of the 3 marks. Yeah. So it doesn't matter how much.
Thank you.
At all. Okay. Excellent.
Brilliant.
Annie.
Brilliant.
You're on mute, Annie. I can't hear you.
Completely separate subject. Trauma. If I don't know how important this idea is. If you think that there may be something repressed that you ought to be realizing or something. I'm 66 now. I mean, would that naturally come, to light in meditation? Because if it hasn't, I'm thinking, well, it never will. I mean, what is this? I mean, I don't know if that's an important question I'm saying or not, but it's something that I think.
Excellent question. And I think I refer back to something that I was talking with Lucy about, which is like, you don't have to second guess it. If there is something that is due to be seen, well, you're not going to see it until you see it. So it's like, you might as well embrace the practice, allow things to emerge, deepen your comprehension, your active, mindful comprehension of the 3 marks: transience, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. And if through continual restraint you find emerging some deeper subconscious, formerly unconscious shadow entity that needs to be dealt with, you will have the tools with which to deal with it. So in a sense, you can almost say, well, you wouldn't be shown that until such time as you had the tools with which to deal with it. Now, having said that, it's like getting a promotion. You never get promoted when you have all the skills. You get promoted in order to learn the skills. So I think there's a certain element of, it's only now coming out of your subconscious because this is where the development needs to be. But again, we can't second guess ourselves. If you haven't come across it so far, maybe there isn't anything there. Maybe you can just content yourself with noting what is here and noting that its nature is to arise and pass away. Does that help?
Thank you very much. I think, about trust, really, coming back to trust, isn't it? Yeah.
It is a faith thing.
I mean, I think I just had one very long time ago with a therapist. I had a moment and I got very frightened. And I said, no, we're not going to talk about this. We're not going to. And she said, look, just breathe, look at me, breathe. And it was as if I mustn't realize this. I mustn't know this. I mustn't feel this. Yeah. And that was just a very frightening. But it was just a sensation of there's something that I mustn't know. And that's disturbing, But I've only had that once. It was many
it is disturbing. But however, it's like, that's why I was saying, like, if you continue to develop the comprehension of the 3 marks through the meditation practice, you will have the skills whereby you are less likely, because it's not the thing that was to be seen, it was the reaction to the thing, that it was the resistance to the thing, not the thing in itself. Because whatever the thing is, it's something we've put in there anyway. So we'll just come back out again. And it's our refusal, the resistance to it, that creates a monster out of it. It's our refusal, it's our desire to seal it off, which is saying this is too important for me to deal with. And so if it still needs dealing with, it will come out, and it's just a question of, do we have the skill set, meditative skill set, to be able to accommodate it? And that's also why having a teacher is really important. And the teacher's job is not to take the problem away from you. The teacher's job is to reassure you that you do indeed have the skills. You do indeed have it about you to be able to accommodate this, to see it for what it is, and let it go. Yeah. Because the more we seal things off, the more importance we're attaching to that thing. The more we're able to let things pass through, the less importance we're attaching to them. Food for thought.
You just said, sorry, one small point. You said you've put it there in the first place. So I mean, you put that there in the first place. I mean, say someone was, I don't know, dashed around or something. But you mean you've put the
memory of it, the experience of it.
Isn't that
sealed it off? And so it's not blame. I mean, no one's being blamed.
Isn't it just that thing they call the pain body? Isn't it just the body that keeps on remembering it or whatever?
That's not. No. I'm not familiar with that way of putting things. I mean, clearly I think there is a physical extension to what goes on mentally. So if mentally we're sealing something off, perhaps it does indeed attempt to come out in a bodily way, you know. But yeah, so if there's something that at the time we couldn't face, something traumatic, as you said, that there comes a point in our meditative development, having put it in there and kept it in there and sealed it off, that perhaps now we're ready to re-explore those emotions or those feelings in order to be able to see that they are indeed not what we thought they were, that they are indeed only memories, they are only feelings, you know, they are only tendencies to certain kinds of thoughts and feelings. And so that's what the practice gives you. It gives you the ability to allow these things back out in order to set them free. Yeah.
Thanks.
No, not at all. But like I say, I think having a teacher is really, really helpful. Someone that you do trust, someone who's on your side, at the very least, just to be able to explore those. This whole thing of just laying something out on the table so that two people are looking at it, which halves its size, is really, really helpful. Dave, hello.
Hi, Paul. I think you've answered the question what I had. I was just thinking in terms of trauma, that the process of the meditation isn't really to solve it, it's to open up to it, to allow it to manifest, and then its nature is to pass. So it's kind of a self-solving system.
Yeah.
But I was thinking in terms of, often we're presented with quite difficult emotional states, and there is a lot of fear around those states and having the capacity to open up to them. I just wonder what your advice was on that.
You have to look at the entirety of the Buddha's teaching. You have to see it in the context of developing an ethical way of living, of compassionate service, of mental practices like loving kindness and compassion, and building a framework that supports your meditative endeavors. Again, having a teacher, somebody who knows the ins and outs of this path, all the nuts and bolts of it, who is able to hold those kinds of conversations, with whom it is possible to hold those kinds of conversations, and therefore the ability to, because the very act of uttering what the problem is to somebody else, that's a kind of magical act. It's like, it's the first real step in non-grasping. It's the first real step in letting go of the tenacious grip with which we hold onto these memories and these emotions. So all those things combined are what allows somebody to finally open up, because you put it in terms of the fears that surround that issue, and that is the issue. It's not the thing itself, it's the fear around it. It's the reluctance, the disinclination to confront. It's not confronting the past at all. It's just allowing what is present to manifest itself in order to see that there is nothing there to be afraid of. That it is the fear itself that gives that memory, or whatever it might be, its strength and its hold over you. It's the fear of it, it's not the memory itself that is holding you hostage. It's the fear of it that's holding you hostage. Yeah, now, if that discovery is made well, that discovery is best made when it is sort of couched in the whole of the Buddha's teaching. And it's also, you've got the theoretical side of, you know, getting your views straight about the nature of existence and what we're doing here in this human realm and why we're here. And if we're here to learn these lessons, suddenly it's creating the space, the psychological space, the theoretical space. It's giving the space for us to actually look at all this stuff. Yes. So I'd say somebody has to have the whole of the teaching rather than just thinking, oh, I'll just be there by myself, you know, unleashing these demons. It doesn't have to be like that at all.
Thank you.
And self-compassion. Compassion for oneself, I think, is hugely important. And again, this teaching gives that. And it's that self-compassion to say, I'm not doing anything wrong here. I'm not wrong to feel like this. I'm not wrong to have these fears surrounding this past event. Now I feel like I'm in a place where I can now sort of open the box and see what's inside. And always, it's the fear and it's the resistance that gives the sense that it's this huge, major, terrible problem. And often the discovery is of what is really there is actually quite disappointing. With quite a relief as well, but it's disappointing in the fact that you gently and gradually get used to this memory and the feelings being there, and you start to realize there's nothing really there of any substance. It was the fear and the resistance that gave it the sense of substance, gave it the sense that there was something really substantial that had to be rejected and sealed off. So I think you have to be mature. You have to be spiritually mature. You just don't dive in. But when you're ready, those things can be released, absolutely, through mindfulness. And just to repeat your point, it's not about solving that past incident. It's not about getting retribution. It's not about, it's surrendering to what arises in the moment and dissolving the tendency to crave for things to be different through seeing the transient, ungraspable, conditioned nature of what arises. This is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself. Yeah. So there's no longer the identification with that as being my thing. And that's how we let go. So I hope that was helpful.
No, that's very good. I kind of, do you feel in a way that, I mean, therapy seems to look for causation and to concretize events to justify your current position, and sort of it does seem to be your therapy seems to look to, I'm not sure if to solve, but to say you should investigate your traumas and your problems, and then that will make you better. Because I'm not sure doesn't always seem the best way. I don't know much, you know, so I'm not a therapist, so I've got no idea really.
Same here. Not a therapist. Never been down that kind of route, never needed to. I have always assumed, and if somebody knows, then please correct me, but the point of all therapy is to reach the point of acceptance that it was as it was. And it's the acceptance of it, which means you don't have to think about it anymore. Well, if you see that the thoughts themselves are arising and passing away, and that they self-liberate quite naturally, and there's a feeling, and that self-liberates quite naturally, quite freely, then do you have to go rummaging around the past, as you say, solidifying and recreating and making stronger those memories in order to reach a point of acceptance? Or can you just do that looking at phenomena as it's arising and passing away in your experience right now. And that's the path I took, and that's the Buddhist path. I'm sure other people have other ideas about it. Liz. Yeah, Liz. You're on mute, sorry.
Just pressing the wrong button.
Oh.
Only just a small thing, but in a sort of Western way of treating something like a spider phobia, you expose yourself, with a therapist, you expose yourself little by little to whatever the thing is that you're fearful of. And in a way, this is a similar process in my experience. It doesn't all happen all at once, but little by little, you know, through ups and downs and crying and being really fed up and upset and everything else. And you gradually get to know whatever the problem is in a different way. Same as a spider phobia, just that you overcome it by getting to know it little by little. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a very good thought. And you know, I don't know what somebody who goes into therapy about. I don't know what that journey is at all. But I sense that it's still trying to get to the same point, which is just an acceptance that what is arising now can't hurt you. That it's only a feeling, it's only a thought. It doesn't have the substance you thought it did. So you reach a point of acceptance so that you don't have to fight it anymore, because fighting it is holding it in being, isn't it? It's keeping it alive. So whatever route somebody takes, at the end of the day, it comes back to, well, the only way I can be free of this is if I no longer try to get free of it, which means it loses its significance for me. It is no longer significant, therefore it can be there. And transience, observing transience, does that like nothing else. It's simply not important because it is a transient phenomena, and there's nothing there that I can identify as being me or mine or myself. So it's a very direct method, and perhaps people, perhaps somebody is in a place where it's too direct and they have to do a little bit of work prior to that to then be able to go there. But does that tally, Liz, with what you're saying? Yeah. Sarah. Okay, we'll make this the last point, Sarah. Oh, you've gone again. Where have you gone, Sarah? You're going to make another point.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Just a small thing. I mean, you really touched on it with saying you need the whole of the path, all the other teachings. And I'm specifically thinking about a lot of therapy that I've come across. And I was looking at a lot of counselling therapy as a training last year. And it seems to be that it's really important to get oneself to a point of having a good self-image, having a decent, okay, I'm fine as I am, because so many people don't have that, and therefore coming to meditation is already a little bit too far for them. I'd actually say it isn't, but I think that's a big part of a lot of therapy. But I totally agree that if somebody's got a whole raft of different things, especially metta, but also developing parami consciously and the mundane right views consciously, then it will necessarily build a very nice, healthy, just I'm fine kind of self-image, which then you can go on to the vipassana work and get the insights coming that show that everything's transient anyway, so what the hell,
Yes, that's a very good point. And it's like I talk a lot about narratives and how when you're mindful, you have far more scope to choose the narrative. You don't even necessarily have to believe the narrative 100%, but the mind will behave as though you do. And it can transform the way you look at yourself and the way you look at the world. So it is, the mundane path is about creating a healthy sense, because it's so much easier to transcend a healthy self-image than it is to transcend an unhealthy self-image. You can't transcend an unhealthy self-image. you're too attached, you're too caught up with yourself and the idea of yourself. Whereas with a healthy self-image, it's far easier to concentrate. It's far easier to let go of identification in meditation when you feel good about yourself. So it all fits beautifully, that the mundane practice fits with meditation. So if it is the case that somebody just is not at that place where they can just sit quietly with themselves, then yeah, it's too soon for mindfulness. It's too soon for proper Buddhist mindfulness. But so, and I wouldn't dare say that like therapies are not useful. Absolutely they are, and I wouldn't want to be misconstrued in that sense. But if you follow the Buddhist path far enough, you will find that you dispense with all those other therapies, and you're no longer concerned about trying to fix the past. Okay, well, we've gone over an hour, so I think we should stop there. I really enjoyed that. I think this format works really, really well. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you for all your comments and questions and observations. Thanks, Roland.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Paul.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, everyone. Have a great week. See you again soon.
Thank you.
See you
Bye.
Wednesday. Thank you.
Bye.